are, I want to tell you that this disaster is a pretty serious disaster. And if there is any way for you to help with funding, with prayer, we appreciate it. Just a couple thoughts on disaster response. All of us, no matter what faith backgrounds we are from, we want to get involved and we want to help people who are suffering. And most of our faiths call us to be involved in those that are suffering because of natural disaster. For me, my Christian faith draws me, especially to be helping orphans and widows in their distress. I'd like to share just a couple things about relief. And we got involved about 30 years ago when we started out on this in this country of Indonesia. And I think the first response was when mountain people were being moved down into a swampy lowland area. And after about 2 weeks, people began to get malaria. So we went down there with mosquito net and began to help them with the necessary medicines that they needed. And I learned an awful lot just watching my parents at work. My parents were missionaries way in a remote area of the island, and I remember watching my father sitting on a jerry can most of the day giving shots of penicillin so that people would be healed up of their tropical ulcers. Or I remember him pulling out arrows or helping people with their rotting teeth. And I think this was what was the foundation for me to get involved. And so we started getting involved in disaster responses. And then we had 2 boys come along and we involved them as well. And it really pleases me now that they have caught a passion for helping people who are suffering. There's a few principles that I'd like to explain to you. One is something that's talked about an awful lot now, and it's called disaster mitigation, or it is doing those things that will prevent the disaster. It would be like helping people to plant trees so that they would eventually not run out of firewood and have wood for their shelters. Disaster mitigation would be building up the riverbanks maybe near their village. That's something that is very important. Then there is a concept of natural disaster and man-made. Natural disaster, of course, we all know what that is. That is volcanoes and tsunamis and earthquakes and famines and those kinds of things. We got involved in the early days in helping the people that were dying of malaria, but then shortly after that we started responding to where earthquakes were happening. And we would go in and help with water and shelters and medicines in any way that we could. And of course, after that, we had a volcano in Bali. We had the terrible tsunami. Our family moved there for a year. And all of these experiences have taught us a few principles that I would like to share with you today. So in a human disaster, it might be what we saw in one place where the people that had built their building correctly with the right mixture of cement and the right amount of rebar, their buildings stood firm. But the poor who couldn't afford those things, their buildings fell flat. There's also something that I call a secondary disaster. And that might be where there is an economic downturn. And because the economy is so bad, it leads then to rioting and political upheaval. There might be situations too where a guy is trying to sell 5 blankets, but the relief agency brings in 500,000 blankets, and so his business is run out. So as we do disaster response, we need to be aware of some of the things that can be created by our actions, and so we have to go wisely. There's also something that is silent and slow. Silent and slow disasters would be things like HIV, and there's probably been more people die of AIDS where I work than all of the disasters caused naturally. And we need to be aware of those things, like the cycle of poverty that takes place where people aren't eating right. Because they're not eating right, their health is bad. We need to be looking at these silent things like the lack of education and also corruption in some places that leads to crises that happen. So disasters come in many forms. A few years ago, my wife and I contributed an article on relief. We submitted the article to this book called Hands, and I just happened to have it with me. And this is a great book, stories from all over the world of people who are involved in holistic development. So what we're talking about is an acronym, RELIEF, R-E-L-I-E-F. The R stands for rapid response. When you have a disaster, it's important that you have a team that is trained, ready to go, that's ready to fly into action. Quick is good. And we have developed our own little manual for our workers here all across our archipelago so that when a disaster happens, they know what to do. We need to choose a center. Sometimes people spend too much time gearing up in a disaster response, but you need to fly into action and then choose a place. And remember, you can't do everything. You can't help everybody, but like my boss used to say in Comma Services, just start somewhere, do something. And something that we often say is, you can't do everything, but you can do something. So wherever you find that there is a need, that's where you go. And I would suggest going where the need is the greatest and where other organizations aren't working. It's important that we gather the facts. Like, have a mind that is asking all kinds of questions. Who needs help the most? And we need to be careful because often when we're gathering the facts, people will try to deceive us. And so you have to be wise in the types of questions that you ask. It's good to interact with the leaders of the area, government officials, fellowship leaders, heads of the mosques or the churches. You're talking with them, finding people of character. We often go in, we start with a small help for people, and then we see how that is utilized. If it's distributed well, we ask around if the person that we're dealing with is a person of character. If they are, that's who we focus on. After the Lombok earthquake, we spent 2 days just going out with survey teams on 5 different motorcycles, asking questions, seeing where we could help, where other NGOs had been involved. And it's important during this time to be communicating with your leadership. Those of you who are leaders know how important it is to be getting information from the front lines so you know how to raise money and what kind of help to send and what kind of people are needed. Is it a place that is insecure when it comes to violence? Or is it an area that needs medical help? Or maybe that's taken care of by the local government. So all of these things, it's very important to be communicating with your leaders on this. There are so often situations where people are doing relief when development should be doing. But in a disaster response, this is where you can be handing out like never before. Because when people are in need, this is the time where money can be spent. Things can be given away because people need everything. E stands for effective partnerships. This is really, really important. Those partnerships might be the local government organization that is helping in the response. Work with them, make them feel like it's their operation as well. And there's core values that need to be established. And let me just tell you that sometimes you might not want to work with an organization just because your core values are so different. But effective partnerships are very important. And when we partner with each other, maybe there are medical people. We can use them. We don't need to be focused on medical, but we might have water distribution. Sometimes we might need to go our separate ways. And that's okay as well. Whatever makes you effective. Sometimes we might have to say no to people that want to join our teams. If they take away the credibility of our disaster response team, it's better that you don't work in partnership with them. And let me just say something too about receiving help. There are sometimes people that want to come in and they have the wrong motive. Maybe it's to promote their political party. They have the banner up. They want the picture as they hand out the box of noodles. Maybe you should say no to that. There are items too that people want to send. I remember in one disaster response, the beach was piled with a mountain of used clothes just rotting on the beach. It was trying to help, but sending things at great expense that the people didn't really want. It's important that we locate local assets. Sometimes it's better to use what's there rather than waiting for the great shipment to come from outside the country or whatever it is. We mobilized trucks locally that come from a nearby city that brought in all the supplies that we need while another NGO was waiting for the big shipment of 737s from outside of the country. Utilize the local knowledge that's there. These people know an awful lot. They know who is in need. They know where the widows and the orphans are located. They know different road systems and where to get clean water. All of these things. We are not smart when we go by them and don't listen to what they have to say. It's important that you also identify who you are. When we go into a situation, we always explain what our NGO core values are about, where we get our funding, and that we're followers of Isa al-Masih. And you know, when you're honest about who you are, there is a trust that develops there. We have what we call signature programs, and that's kind of the things that we focus on. Of course, there's the shelter kits, where we go in, we provide tarps and hammer, nails, crowbar, saw in little packages, where often after a disaster there is a lot of rubble, there's a lot of things that are left over, and people are able to scrounge to do in the first days to build what they need to keep out of the rain. We also really like to focus on water distribution, and that's one of the things that we've often done, is we have been delivering water in about 5 of the last disaster responses. We just load up a truck with big old water tanks and then go out every day, and most people in a disaster situation need water. And also trauma counseling. Remember that in a disaster situation, the trauma that people have experienced, they have lost everything. I remember landing in one situation and I said, okay, what is it that you need? And they looked at me like I was a dummy and said, well, we need everything. And it was true. So people have been traumatized. Never go in and say, oh, I know how you feel, or don't cry, or be strong. Let them cry. Let them share. Let them help you to understand everything that they've gone through. Often there's been times where I have just put my arm around people and cried with them to show how deeply I feel for their loss. So often people focus on the food and the shelter and the housing, everything that they need, the water. But sometimes it's more important to slow down and focus on the trauma that people are going through. I think it's important that you find what your niche is. Maybe it's health. Maybe it's water. Maybe it's building latrines for the people. But find signature program. One of our signature programs is a voucher program. And I will be dealing with that in another short video. It's important that we encourage like-minded people to be involved. When we go in, there are people who are like us, who believe like us, who are passionate about helping. And when we partner with these people, they continue to go on in rehabilitation and development. And I'll be speaking later about that in another little video that you can access. But for now, let's focus on the relief aspect. The great thing about partnering with like-minded organizations, people who are going to be there after we're gone, is that they know everybody that is in need, and they have the respect of the local people. And you know, in most of the disaster responses where we have been involved, we still have people who are working there and who are serving and have gone on to do some great things in development. Forget recognition. So often, and I've already alluded to it, people want their banners up, they want to plant their flag, They want everybody to know about the great things that they have done. Many want the selfies that they can put on there and Instagram. And although technology is good, one of the things that I have seen now in the last few years is everybody wants their picture taken. Now, publicity is important, and you need to be sending videos to your leaders. Those things are important for fundraising. We are to do our good works in secret. Don't let your right hand know what your left hand is doing. And what is done in secret is seen by our Lord in heaven. So concluding, my friends, disaster response is difficult. It is hard. We have slept under pieces of plastic out underneath the stars, in houses that are falling apart, with earthquakes going on all around us. But I must say that one of the great things is that we're able to help people, and we're able to inspire others to help people. And we are all called to respond when people are in situations that are desperate. So friends, thank you for this time that we spent together. If you'd like to contact me, see my email address below. I'd love to learn from you as well. May God's peace be upon you.